Most people think that when an avoidant man pulls away during intimacy, it means he didn't feel enough. It often means the opposite. It means he felt something real enough to unsettle him, and now you are sitting there replaying the exact phrase he used, trying to decide whether you misunderstood. He said he isn't ready. He said he needs space. He said this got intense. He said you deserve more than he can give. And because part of you is still kind, still generous, still trying to make sense of the heartbreak without turning him into a villain, you have been searching for the hidden meaning inside those words, as if one more analysis could spare you the ache of what happened. But here is the truth. The ache is not coming from confusion alone. It is coming from the fact that some part of you knows there was warmth there, knows there was chemistry there, knows there were moments that felt intimate and honest, and now you are being asked to treat those moments as if they meant less than they felt. That is why this hurts the way it hurts. Not because you are dramatic, not because you are weak, because your nervous system can feel when something was opened and then left unfinished. And here's something most people don't see coming. Avoidant people are not empty. They are not untouched by intimacy. They are often starving for exactly the thing they keep disrupting. What they crave during intimacy is not just affection, not just sex, not just companionship, not just someone to admire them while asking very little in return. They crave the feeling of being met without being invaded. They crave closeness without the terror of exposure. They crave warmth without the fear that warmth is going to become expectation. They crave love without the mirror that love inevitably holds up. That is the contradiction. And if you have ever loved someone like this, you know how maddening that contradiction becomes. Because for a while, it feels as though your care is reaching him, your patience is helping him, your steadiness is softening him. Then suddenly, the same closeness he leaned into becomes the thing he retreats from, and you are left holding the emotional weight of an intimacy that he helped create but could not remain inside. Picture this. It is 11 at night, your phone is face down on the nightstand, and you are replaying that moment when his tone changed. Maybe it was after a beautiful weekend. Maybe it was after you told him how much he meant to you. Maybe it was after a stretch of closeness where he looked unusually present, unusually open, unusually sincere. You thought, finally, we are not in the orbit anymore. We are here, we are in something real. Then the next day he was colder, slower, vague, harder to reach. And what broke your heart was not just the distance. It was the whiplash, the sudden shift in the dynamic. The way tenderness seemed to trigger absence. The way intimacy seemed to awaken a retreat he could not explain. That is the part that can make you question your own instincts, because the choreography becomes so disorienting. He moved toward you. He opened the door. He created the atmosphere. Then when you stepped into it, honestly, he acted as though the room had become too small. Here's what most people miss. Avoidance is not always a lack of desire for connection. Very often, it is a profound limitation in tolerating what connection awakens. Carl Jung wrote about the shadow, the disowned parts of the self, the feelings and needs we exile, because they make us feel vulnerable, needy, dependent, ashamed, or out of control. Now, let me explain something slowly. An avoidant man may carry a deep hunger to be loved, chosen, soothed, understood, even adored, while also carrying a powerful internal shame about needing any of those things. So when intimacy begins to touch that buried hunger, it does not feel simple to him. It feels exposing. It feels like the spotlight is suddenly on needs he has spent years to discuss through independence, charm, busyness, aloofness, or emotional ambiguity. He wants closeness, but he wants it on terms that protect him from ever feeling at the mercy of it. He wants your warmth, but he wants to believe he does not need your warmth. He wants the safety of being seen, but he fears what you will see if you really stay long enough. And here's the thing. When an avoidant person says, "I need space," that sentence is often carrying more than one truth. On the surface, it sounds like a request for distance. Underneath, it can also be an attempt to regulate panic, shame, guilt, overwhelm, and the terrifying sense that another person now matters enough to affect him. Is that romantic? No. Is it noble? Not necessarily, but it is often real. And if you do not understand this, you can spend months translating his withdrawal as proof that nothing meant anything, when in fact part of the problem is that it meant enough to activate everything he has not learned to face. That does not excuse what he did. It does not make you responsible for rescuing him from emotional immaturity. But it does help you stop personalizing every retreat as a verdict on your worth. Let me be clear about one thing. What avoidants crave during intimacy is often the very thing they cannot say out loud, because saying it would force them to admit dependency. And dependency, to them, can feel dangerous. They may crave reassurance, but not want to ask for it. They may crave gentleness, but flinch when they receive too much of it. They may crave consistency, but feel uncomfortable when consistency starts to imply a future. They may crave your acceptance, but become unsettlingly distant the moment they sense that your acceptance includes seeing their fear, their fragility, their confusion. Why? Because to be known in that way means giving up the upper hand they believe distance gives them. It means admitting that the connection has power. It means surrendering the narrative that they are the one deciding how close this gets and when it stops. He starts to wonder why intimacy feels good for a moment and then threatening the next. And here's the thing. The threat is not always you. Often, the threat is the feeling that he cannot manage what your closeness brings up in him. He starts to feel tenderness, longing, protectiveness, desire, and dependency gathering in the same room. And because he has never learned how to sit in that room without reaching for the exit, he looks for a reason to leave that does not force him to say, "I am scared of how much this matters." So he says he is confused. He says the timing is off. He says he needs to work on himself. He says he cannot give you what you deserve. Sometimes those sentences contain fragments of truth, but they are also part of the script. They allow him to retreat without having to speak the rawest truth, which is that intimacy has reached the part of him that still equates need with danger. I want to pause on that for a second, because if you loved someone like this, you may have been taught to focus only on what he could not give. But understanding what he secretly craved can bring a different kind of closure. He craved relief from his own loneliness. He craved the experience of being emotionally held without losing his autonomy. He craved someone who could read the temperature of the room and not shame him for cooling down. He craved permission to be imperfect without immediately being measured. He craved the softness of being wanted. He craved the dignity of not having to beg for care. He craved a kind of love that did not feel like a courtroom. And because he craved these things while also fearing them, he often ended up creating the very conditions that destroyed them. Think about it like this. An avoidant man often tries to hold intimacy the way someone tries to keep a volleyball underwater. For a while, with enough force, you can do it. You can press down on your own tenderness. You can control the depth. You can decide what stays submerged. But the ball keeps wanting to rise. Your feelings keep wanting to surface. Your attachment keeps pressing upward. And the more effort it takes to control it, the more exhausting the whole experience becomes. So eventually he does not say, "I am exhausted," by suppressing what this connection awakens in me. He just lets go in the wrong direction. He becomes inconsistent. He drifts. He turns your attempts to understand into pressure. He mistakes your clarity for demand. And then he frames the breakup as if the problem was simply too much feeling from you, when often the real issue was too much denied feeling in him. Here's what's actually happening underneath all of this. During intimacy, avoidants often crave a form of closeness that lets them remain unaccountable to the impact they have. They want love without the full weight of reciprocity. They want presence without the consequence of promise. They want your devotion without having to examine whether they are living at the standard that devotion deserves. That is why ambiguous relationships with them can become so painful. Not because nothing is happening, because plenty is happening. But the dynamic stays tilted. You are asked to hold the meaning while he holds the exit. You are asked to provide warmth while he preserves optionality. You are asked to endure uncertainty so he does not have to endure the discomfort of naming what he really wants or cannot offer. And over time, that makes you forget your own self-respect, because the entire pattern trains you to become fluent in crumbs and allergic to clear standards. He didn't expect you to notice the emotional bargain being made. He expected you to stay grateful for whatever closeness he offered instead. And that expectations matters because it reveals how the pattern sustains itself. If you are so focused on decoding him, soothing him, not losing him, and proving that you are safe, then you are less likely to step back and ask the question that would change everything. What is this costing me? Not theoretically, not someday, right now. What is it costing your peace, your sleep, your concentration, your dignity, your sense of self-worth, your willingness to trust your own perception? Avoidance does not only hurt because of what he withholds. It hurts because of the pattern it invites in you if you are not careful. The pattern of abandoning your own boundary in the hope that enough understanding will finally make him able to choose you. And here's something else most people don't see. An avoidant man can crave a woman's steadiness precisely because he lacks steadiness in himself. Your calm becomes magnetic. Your emotional availability becomes almost medicinal. Your patience becomes a kind of borrowed nervous system. He feels better around you because your regulation softens his chaos. But that does not automatically mean he has the capacity to build a life around that feeling. Sometimes he wants the medicine without wanting the responsibility that comes with taking it. Sometimes he wants the sanctuary without wanting the structure required to keep it. Sometimes he wants the reunion feeling over and over again, the relief, the warmth, the welcome back, while resisting the daily consistency that would make a reunion unnecessary. That is why the orbit can be so seductive. It gives him doses of intimacy without requiring the full humility of commitment. He starts to wonder why he misses you when he is away but panics when you get close. And here's the thing, longing from a distance is easier than intimacy up close. Distance lets him romanticize you without being changed by you. Distance lets him keep the fantasy without confronting the reality that real love reorganizes a person. Real intimacy asks for adaptation. It asks for honesty. It asks for the surrender of some self-protective habits. It asks him to feel the weight of his impact. It asks him to stop living as though every bond must leave the wings clear in case he wants to exit the stage. And if he has built his identity around escape routes, then your closeness does not just feel loving, it feels life-altering. That can be beautiful in a healthy person. In an avoidant person, it can feel deeply unsettling. Now, let me explain something slowly. The thing he often cannot say out loud during intimacy is, I want to trust this, but I don't trust myself inside it. Do you hear the difference? It is not always that he thinks you are too much. Sometimes he thinks he will fail you. Sometimes he senses the bare minimum in himself and feels ashamed of it. Sometimes he can feel your standard rising naturally, not because you are demanding, but because real intimacy raises the cost of vagueness. Once two people have shared tenderness, the old easy ambiguity becomes harder to maintain without guilt. So he retreats before the contrast becomes unbearable. He pulls back before you can see the gap between the version of himself he likes to present and the limitations he suspects are about to disappoint you. This is the part nobody's going to like hearing. Some avoidant men are deeply wounded. Some are deeply selfish. Many are both. And if you are not careful, you will use the first truth to erase the second. You will tell yourself that because he is scared, he should be forgiven for every inconsistency. Because he has trauma, he should be exempt from accountability. Because he has emotional immaturity, you should accept less than clarity. No. Understanding him is not the same as giving him permission to hurt you indefinitely. Insight is not a substitute for a boundary. Compassion is not a replacement for self-respect. You are allowed to understand the psychology and still refuse the pattern. He didn't expect you to stop making excuses for him. He expected you to keep translating his silence into hidden depth instead. And when you stop doing that, a power shift occurs. Not because you are playing games, not because mystery is some tactic, but because reality re-enters the room. Suddenly the narrative is no longer centered on what he feels but cannot say. It is centered on what he does and will not do. It is centered on whether your life becomes smaller in order to accommodate his indecision. It is centered on whether you have begun orbiting a man who enjoys your presence but resists your full humanity. That is the moment reclaiming begins. Quietly, cleanly, without a speech. Here's the truth. An avoidant person often craves a kind of intimacy where your warmth reaches him without ever requiring him to put words to his hunger. He wants you to intuit. He wants you to understand the unsaid. He wants you to feel that he does care, even if he cannot say it consistently, prove it reliably, or organize his behavior around it. Why? Because if you can do all that, then he gets the emotional benefits of closeness while keeping the protection of ambiguity. But real intimacy does not work like that for long. Eventually, what is unsaid becomes the loudest thing in the room. Eventually, your body notices that the tenderness is real, but the container is weak. Eventually, your heart recognizes that someone can feel deeply and still not be available in the ways that matter. Those two truths can exist at once. He can care, and he can still be wrong for you. I want to walk through this with you one piece at a time. There is a sequence that often happens with avoidance, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. First, there is attraction to your energy because you feel grounding, enlivening, emotionally literate, or simply safe. Then there is movement toward you, real interest, real contact, often real chemistry. Then intimacy begins to deepen, and with it comes relief in him, because for a little while he feels less alone, less armored, less restless. Then the deeper layer arrives. He feels seen, not admired from afar, seen. And that is when the internal split emerges. One part of him wants to lean further in. Another part starts calculating escape. Then he becomes inconsistent. Then you become anxious. Then he reads your anxiety as evidence that things are getting too intense. And now the original wound in him gets projected onto you as if your desire for normal clarity were the problem. That is the pattern. That is the choreography. And if you stay in it long enough, you stop hearing your own voice. Let me be clear about something. What he craves most may not be romance in the way you think of it. It may be relief from the self he has to be when no one is close. Avoidants often walk through life carrying a private exhaustion. They are managing impressions, managing distance, managing vulnerability, managing the threat of disappointment, managing the fear of being needed and the fear of not being loved. So intimacy can feel like a homecoming for them in small doses. They soften. They become funny, present, affectionate, even childlike in the sweetest way. And because that side of them is so genuine when it appears, you believe it is the truest version. Maybe it is. But if he has not built the emotional muscles to stay there, then that truth does not yet have structure. It is a glimpse, not a foundation. He starts to wonder what you see in him that he cannot hold on to by himself. And here's the thing. Being loved can expose self-rejection. That is one of Jung's great insights. We do not only fear pain, we fear the collapse of the identities we built to survive pain. If he has organized himself around being self-contained, unbothered, hard to pin down, then your love threatens his whole structure. Not because love is bad, because it asks him to become someone more integrated than the person he has practiced being. It calls the shadow to the surface. It brings dependency, grief, tenderness, longing, shame, and hope into one chamber. And if he has spent years keeping those parts in separate locked rooms, intimacy feels like someone opened every door at once. Here's what most people miss. Silence is not only something you use after he pulls away. Silence is part of what he is already using inside himself. He is silent about his fear, silent about his need, Silent about the pressure he feels to live up to the version of closeness he briefly offered. Silent about the panic that comes when he senses your expectation becoming real life. Silent about the guilt of knowing he is receiving more emotional labor than he is returning. Silent about the fact that your affection may be creating a void in him he can no longer ignore. And that void matters because what begins as emptiness turns into vacuum, and vacuum creates pull. Pull becomes echo, echo becomes weight, weight becomes inquiry, inquiry becomes reckoning. Reckoning becomes the terrifying realization that he may have driven away the very peace he keeps telling himself he wants. That is why some avoidants do not come back quickly. They have to sit with the echo long enough for it to become louder than their defenses, and some never do. Not because you meant nothing, because the reckoning would require a self-confrontation they are still not ready for. I want you to notice something. Your silence after his withdrawal is not always about getting the upper hand. In fact, when it is used as a tactic, it often loses its dignity. The deepest silence is not performance. It is self-respect made audible through absence. It is you refusing to keep auditioning for a part in someone else's half-written script. It is you declining to narrate his feelings for him. It is you allowing the void to be real. He didn't expect you to become quiet with dignity. He expected you to fill every gap with explanations, reassurance, and availability instead. He expected the old pattern to continue because the old pattern protected him from consequences. When you do not chase, when you do not rush in to soothe, when you do not volunteer for second choice under the banner of understanding, something changes. The mirror goes up, and silence becomes the one thing he cannot manipulate because it is not an argument. It is reality. Think about it like this. Silence is a mirror held up to him. If he still has feeling, he sees himself in it. He sees the gap between what he said and what he did. He sees the warmth he was given and the absence he returned. He sees the woman who was willing to meet him honestly and the part of himself that could only tolerate her in fragments. If he feels nothing, the mirror remains blank and your silence still serves you because it protects your dignity. Either way, it is not wasted. This is why chasing so often backfires. Chasing interrupts the mirror. It rushes in to clean the image before he has to look. It provides an escape hatch from consequence. It lets him keep you in the wings, close enough to feel your warmth, far enough not to face the full weight of losing it. He starts to wonder why your absence feels heavier than your words ever did. And here's the thing. Absence speaks the language avoidance. Understand best. It does not demand, explain, persuade, or plead. It simply changes the air. It turns the familiar room strange. It removes the quiet emotional cushion he had started taking for granted. It creates a gap where your energy used to be. And in that gap, his own unmet need becomes harder to avoid. That does not mean he will suddenly transform. Do not romanticize that. The void can awaken longing without producing maturity. It can produce nostalgia without accountability. It can produce a comeback attempt that is more about soothing his discomfort than building something new. This is why your self-worth has to remain at the center. His missing you is not the same as his being ready for intimacy. And here's something most people don't see coming. Sometimes what an avoidant man craves during intimacy is not to be praised, but to be handled gently in his brokenness without having to name it. He wants you to sense when he is shutting down. He wants you to know how to come close without feeling intrusive. He wants you to offer softness without asking too many questions. He wants to be received with warmth while still being allowed to remain partly hidden. In other words, he wants a level of attunement that borders on telepathy. And it is seductive to try to become that person. It can make you feel special, chosen, almost spiritually connected. But here is the danger. The more you become expert in his unsaid world, the easier it becomes to disappear from your own. You become brilliant at reading him and strangely estranged from yourself. I'm going to say something, and some of you will disagree, A man's inability to ask for what he craves does not make his craving more sacred. It just makes it less workable. There is a romance people attached to emotional mystery, as if hidden feeling must be deeper feeling. Not always. Sometimes mystery is just fear wearing beautiful clothes. Sometimes silence is not profound. It is avoidance. Sometimes what feels magnetic is simply intermittent availability activating your nervous system. That does not mean the connection was fake. It means you have to be careful not to build a cathedral around fragments. A few intimate moments, however real, do not erase a pattern of absence. He didn't expect you to stop living in his narrative. He expected you to keep arranging your days around the possibility of his return instead. This is where your life must come back into focus. Because while you have been studying his energy, your own routine may have thinned out. Your appetite may have changed. Your friendships may have become secondary. Your attention may have been captured by one person's inconsistency to such a degree that your own inner world started narrowing. That narrowing is dangerous. It makes one man's confusion feel like destiny. It makes the relationship feel larger than life, because your life has gotten smaller around it. Reclaiming does not begin with a dramatic declaration. It begins with expansion, your calendar, your body, your attention, your standards, your willingness to let reality be reality. Here's the truth. You are not here to become perfectly digestible to someone who fears intimacy. You are not here to become so low pressure, so endlessly understanding, so beautifully undemanding that he never has to confront himself. That is not love. That is accommodation mistaken for grace. Love can be patient. Love can be compassionate. Love can make room for human limitations. But love cannot survive forever where there is no accountability. A relationship cannot be built around one person's fear and the other person's infinite adaptation. At some point, your boundary has to say what your heart was too hopeful to say. I care about you. I see you. And this is still not enough for me. Now, let me explain something slowly. The version of you he pulled away from is not the version of you sitting here now. Even if this happened recently, something has already shifted. Pain rearranges perception. The you who once thought patience alone would fix the dynamic is already changing. The you who kept the door open a little too long is already learning the cost of that openness when it is not met with integrity. The you who treated his ambivalence as a puzzle to solve is beginning, slowly, to understand that ambiguity is information. The you he rejected no longer exists in exactly the same way because heartbreak has introduced a new standard, a painful one, an expensive one, but a real one. You are becoming a woman who can feel compassion without surrendering clarity. He starts to wonder if you have moved on, if you have met someone else, if the place he occupied in your mind has gone quiet. And here's the thing, those questions are not your job to answer. They belong to the silence, they belong to the absence, they belong to the consequences of his own choice. Your task is not to feed the echo. Your task is to listen to what the experience has revealed about your own pattern. Did you overfunction? Did you accept the bare minimum and call it potential? Did you confuse emotional intensity with emotional safety? Did you abandon your own standard because the connection felt rare? None of these questions are there to shame you. They are there to return you to yourself. Because the deepest lesson is not simply that he was avoidant. It is that you must become less available to any dynamic that asks you to betray your own dignity in order to sustain it. I need you to hear me. There is nothing noble about staying emotionally on call for someone who can only love you in bursts. There is nothing spiritually advanced about being endlessly understanding while your needs go underground. There is no prize for being the woman who tolerated more because she could see the wound beneath the behavior. Seeing the wound may make you compassionate. It should not make you compliant. Your self-worth is not proven by how much pain you can metabolize without leaving. It is proven, in part, by the moment you stop volunteering for confusion. And here's something most people don't see. Your silence is not only doing something to him, it is doing something to you. It is detoxifying your nervous system from the constant checking, waiting, interpreting, and hoping. It is giving your body a break from the pattern of microadrenaline that inconsistent contact creates. It is creating room for your own thoughts to become audible again. It is allowing your internal world to stop revolving around someone else's emotional weather. This matters because when you are in the orbit of an avoidant, you can begin to live as a satellite, always adjusting, always tracking, always responding to shifts that are not under control. Silence cuts that cord, not instantly, but steadily. Think about it like this. Dignity is something you carry, and every time you tolerate what injures you in the name of patience, it gets heavier. Every time you override your own boundary to preserve access to someone unavailable, it gets heavier. Every time you send the text you know is really an attempt to relieve your own panic rather than honor your truth, it gets heavier. But when you begin choosing yourself in small, quiet ways, dignity becomes lighter again, easier to wear, more natural on your body, more like your own skin. That is the comeback that matters, not his, yours. He didn't expect you to build a life that no longer revolves around waiting. He expected you to remain emotionally parked where he left you instead. And the reason that matters is simple. People do not only respond to your words, they respond to your orientation. They feel when your life is organized around your own center and when it is organized around the possibility of them. There is a magnetism in a woman who is no longer bargaining with reality. Not because she is trying to be magnetic, because she is no longer leaking energy through pursuit. She is present. She is full. She is back in contact with her own standard. That changes everything, beginning with what she is willing to entertain. So what do you do now? Practically, quietly, without turning this into a performance. You make your world tactile again. You pick up the phone and call the friend you have been meaning to call. You go outside, even if your mind tells you to stay in the cave of analysis. You move your body not to become desirable, but to come back into contact with yourself. You clear one neglected corner of your room because order outside can begin to soothe disorder inside. You eat something steadying. You re-enter the parts of your life that existed before this man became a chapter in your mind. You stop visiting the emotional crime scene every night, hoping the evidence will change. It won't. You let the facts be enough. Here's the thing. Healing after an avoidant dynamic is often less about dramatic closure and more about refusing to keep reopening the wound. You do not need a perfect final conversation to begin reclaiming your peace. You do not need him to suddenly articulate the psychology of his withdrawal for you to understand that it hurt. You do not need him to validate your experience in order for it to be valid. Sometimes the cleanest closure is this. He could not say out loud what he craved, and he also could not love in the way that would make those cravings safe for both of you. That is sad. It may even be tragic, but it is still not your assignment to solve. If he comes back, and many do, you listen less to the poetry of his return and more to the structure of it. Has anything changed in the pattern? Is there actual accountability? Is there naming? Is there steadiness? Is there room for your feelings without him treating them as pressure? Is there a willingness to stay in uncomfortable conversations instead of disappearing into silence? Is there a real standard now, or just another reunion scene designed to relieve the void? This is where self-respect becomes practical. It stops asking, does he miss me? And starts asking, what is he capable of sustaining? And here's the truth. The thesis beneath all of this is simple. His withdrawal from intimacy does not measure your value. It measures his capacity. I want you to hold on to that, not as a slogan, as a clean piece of reality. His withdrawal does not measure your beauty, your intelligence, your lovabilities, your depth, or your worth. It measures how far he can go before closeness forces him to confront himself. And if that distance is short, that is painful information. But it is information, not a verdict on you. I want to pause on that for a second, because this is where many women get lost. They understand the psychology and then quietly turn it into self-erasure. They say, well, he is avoidant, so of course this happened. No, that may explain the pattern. It does not mean you are meant to live inside it. The point of understanding is not to help you endure more. The point is to help you see sooner, to see the limitations without romanticizing them, to see the pattern before it becomes your home, to see that someone can be wounded and still be unable to meet you with dignity. The deepest intimacy you are being invited into now is not with him. It is with yourself, with the version of you who knows when warmth is mutual and when it is merely borrowed, with the version of you who can feel longing without turning it into permission, with the version of you who no longer confuses potential with promise, with the version of you who can let mystery remain mystery without volunteering to be consumed by it. That is maturity, not cynicism, not coldness, maturity. And here's something most people don't see coming. When you finally step out of the orbit, when you stop feeding the pattern, when you let silence become a boundary rather than a tactic, there is grief, real grief. Because part of what you are mourning is not just him. You are mourning the future you briefly imagined, the tenderness you glimpsed, the version of him who seemed reachable in certain moments, the reunion your heart kept drafting in private. Let yourself grieve that, cleanly, without using grief as a bridge back into confusion. You can honor what you hoped for without going back to what harmed you. His withdrawal from intimacy does not measure your value. It measures his capacity. And if he could not stay, then your task is not to shrink until staying becomes easier for the next man. Your task is to remain whole enough that when someone cannot meet you, you recognize it earlier. You bow out sooner. You preserve your energy. You keep your dignity. That is self-respect. That is the standard. And that is how the story changes. Not because he finally says the thing he could never say out loud, but because you no longer need his confession in order to trust what the silence already told you.